Good afternoon, I'm Molly O'Brien. Thank you so much for joining us here on GoLocal Live in the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. Hopefully you enjoyed our 3 o'clock version live at the State House. Thanks to Kate Nagel and crew up there. Lots of great information and a success at the State House. I'd like to say hello and welcome here in the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center as we kick things off at 4 p.m. I'd like to say hello and welcome to our friend Ray Rickman of Stages of Freedom. He is here to give us this week's Rickman's Big View. Take it away.
Thank you very much. In America, you get ready to see a historic building or site. You have to get in your car or airplane or train or however you're going to get there. Every once in a while you go on a bike and you go down to Williamsburg or whatever you do. And whammo, you're there. Have you ever heard of them bringing a historic structure to you? So Brown University has paid for and made possible, and a kind of joyous gift, really, to the nation and certainly to Providence and Rhode Island and New England, the bringing here to Waterfire's new site, Rosa Parks' house, all the way from Germany. It's just like really incredible. Now what's going to happen is what happens all the time. Thousands of people are going to think about going to see it, and then they're not going to do it, because they're going to go next week, because they don't know where it is, because. Don't let that happen to you. I just told you, Brown University is forking up hundreds of thousands of dollars to bring Rosa Parks' Detroit house to Providence, Rhode Island. And they're spending all this. I met the architect the other night. It was like really cool. I met the architect. And they're going to put it back together. They're going to put up display panels, teaching. It's a teaching moment. And the teaching moment's going to last a couple months. So you have the time. You should call 863-1000 Brown University and say, when is the house opening for the public? Or call Waterfire and ask them. Teachers, I'm deputizing you. Ministers, I'm deputizing you. Rabbis, I'm deputizing you. To make this happen for 2 people, 22 people, class of 30, wouldn't it be cool if the Principals Association of Rhode Island went to see it, but also the Real Estate Association of Rhode Island, en masse? Go see it, hang out there for an hour, and then all go have a drink at Omni, wherever you want to go. This is a moment. Now, what is it about? You get to learn about the modern civil rights movement. You get to learn about Rosa Parks, the civil rights icon. You get to see a house that made it possible for her to flee the danger of Alabama, go to Detroit, and stay alive after all the threats. This is a fabulous moment. Don't miss it. Now, at Stages of Freedom, it's our job, our mission, to teach Black culture and history to the entire community. And Brown is making it possible for us to encourage you to step out. Let me make this final comment. People often see civil rights as something for Black people. It's the most absurd misinformation on the planet. The Civil Rights Bill contained great fruits for people like Italian Americans who were discriminated because of their ethnicity or their country of origin. Go read the Civil Rights Bill. Probably the largest benefactors of the '64 Civil Rights Act are women who couldn't get a job in this law firm, this accounting firm, any fire department. Rosa Parks helped do that for you.
Thank you, Mr. Rickman. If you are interested in watching any of his big views, you can always go back and watch them all on GoLocalProf.com. Please stay with us here on GoLocal Live as we get set up for our next guest here in the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. Please hang tight.
And just so I'm clear, this is all just like live. There's no editing, correct?
You got it. Hey everyone, thanks for joining us here in the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'm Molly O'Brien. I'd like to say hello and welcome to our next guest, filmmaker and visual journalist Nathan Fitch joins us live via Skype. Nathan, how you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm so good. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Fitch is going to be speaking with us today about his award-winning documentary, Island Soldier. And Fitch is also going to maybe talk to us a little bit about some of his other award-winning work that's been published in The New Yorker, The New York Times, Time Magazine, and NPR. But let's first start off by talking about Island Soldier, your first feature-length documentary, which is about the people from the island nation of Micronesia serving in the United States military. Let's start off by you just telling us a little bit about the film itself.
Sure. So I came to it, I was in the Peace Corps after I finished undergrad, and I lived on an island called Koshrai, which is about 42 square miles near the equator. So kind of in between the Philippines and Japan, or in between Hawaii and the Philippines, rather. And so I kind of lived in the community for 2 years, did everything with a family, was adopted by a family. And as over the course of the time I was there, I watched as young men and women were recruited into the U.S. military, left, went to Iraq or Afghanistan, and then came home. And I guess Island Soldier was kind of inspired by seeing the changes that took place in them and being curious about what it's like to go from one of the most remote, peaceful islands in the world to war and come back again, like what that journey is like. So that was really the question that the film kind of set off to explore.
And the film is beautifully done, so congratulations on that aspect. Talk to us about the process of this, because you really take an in-depth look at the people involved in this, and you're not just looking at them from a home perspective. You're really getting very intimately involved in these people's life, and in some aspects, their death and the emotional toll that takes, and you follow them along. Talk to us about the process of making this film and the journey that it took you on.
Sure. I mean, so as a documentarian, part of my job is to show up and film things, right? But in situations where it's life or death and things are more intense, you really have to have the relationships kind of lined up in order for people to trust you when you show up with a camera. And I think that the intimacy and the access that was granted to Island Soldier, to the production, was really predicated out of those 2 years that I lived in the island. Live with a family. I speak the language pretty well, I'd say. And so when I came back to make the documentary, people were really open to it because they had seen me for years. And I went back, actually when I was living in Providence in 2010, I got a grant. And so I went back in 2011 and did another project. So I've kind of been going back and forth. But it started off, I just bought a plane ticket and flew to Micronesia and shot some stuff, and didn't really know what I was getting into or kind of how to make a feature-length doc, but just kept on going. And yeah, so it's been a challenging project, but a really rewarding one. And yeah.
And it's very thorough. Talk to us about why you felt it was important to do this. Some people might not. I mean, you really do bring attention to the issues at large here. Why was that important for you to do so? Some people might not even know where Micronesia is.
I think that gets at my kind of original motivation. Like as Americans, like, should we know who's fighting for us? You know, like there's another generation, like my grandfather, who sailed through Micronesia en route to fight in World War II. And I think for that generation, these islands had a little more relevance. Like Peleliu and Palau, a great number of American soldiers died taking the island. And so I think at that period, people had some sort of understanding of the relationships and the connections. And I think, you know, when I got back from the Peace Corps, I would tell people about the islands and no one had any clue, and much less a clue that people from these islands are volunteering and fighting in our military at higher rates per capita than we as Americans are. And I think that especially in kind of the current moment where it's sort of America's divided and there's like an America First movement, kind of understanding the sacrifice that people are making who are not U.S. citizens for our safety and security is all the more important, right? Like if people are not going to be allowed the same benefits, what is the morality of enlisting them and putting them in harm's way?
What has the attention been like from this, and from people that live within Micronesia, and then people who are going to see the film? So these people, they're not U.S. citizens, but they are choosing to go and fight for America. They're enlisting in the United States military. What has feedback been like for them from you bringing attention to any of these issues? What has feedback been like from them?
So we've been touring the film for the last year at film festivals. But I guess I would share with you two screenings that were really interesting that I did at the end of last year, that we did at the end of last year for the U.S. government, one for the State Department and one for the Department of the Interior. And it was really great to be invited into the, government buildings and be allowed to screen the film. And I mean, one thing that was kind of interesting was that a lot of the people in attendance were not, even though the Pacific was kind of the region that they specialize in, were not really acquainted with the story. And so I think that in terms of justifying making the film, I feel very clear that it was important that we do it because people just don't know the story very well. And yeah, the response was actually quite positive. For the screening at the Department of the Interior, we had two Micronesian soldiers do the Q&A with me, and it was really great to have their voices kind of amplified beyond the screen, because it was really important for me. There is like a colonial history of anthropologists coming in or outside filmmakers parachuting in and telling the story of Pacific Islanders. And, in the film, the narrative is entirely told in the voices of the Islanders, which was an important sort of decision for us as filmmakers. But even more than that, to have the soldiers watch the film and then be on stage and get to respond to it in real time was incredibly incredibly rewarding. And one of the questions that came out of the audience was like, why? Why are you guys enlisting? Why would you do that? And one of the soldiers talked about how his grandmother had been one of the first people on his island killed during World War II in a shelling. And then, excuse me, and then after this sort of difficult period of being essentially enslaved by the Japanese, the U.S. came in, liberated the people, that he felt this patriotism toward America. And I think that is something that most Americans wouldn't think about, that people from these very remote islands would feel some kind of connection to us.
I mean, that gives you goosebumps to be able to hear that, to feel that deep sense of patriotism generations removed. That's absolutely remarkable, and yet no other rewards being sound, right? Truly remarkable. I do want to continue kind of exploring this and talking about your movie being screened within the Department of Interior. Were you, people make documentaries for many different reasons, whether they want to bring attention to an issue, whether they want people to know about something, whether they want social change. Talk to me about what that was like for you to have a screening with the Department of Interior, how that felt for you, and then we'll kind of explore that a little bit more.
Sure. Happy to talk about that. But just one thing I'd want to add in before we go on is that the patriotism is very real, and that's a very real part of the motivation. But there is also an economic, angle that in a sense these young men and women can enlist in the military and make as much as the highest paid government officials on their island as a entry level recruit. So in some ways, it's the motivation and the narrative is kind of complicated, and that was part of the reason it felt like it needed to be a feature versus like a short documentary, because there's these different kind of motivations that are galvanizing these people into like enlisting at such high rates per capita. But for me, personally, it's incredible when you make something and then you get to see that if you get to see an audience affected by that. That's like one thing. As a human, I think there's like an ego within us all that like you work really, really hard on this thing, and then it's done and people appreciate it, and it's like an incredible feeling. But I think for the DC screenings in particular, knowing that the people there could actually change policy was a really kind of amazing experience to sort of be in front of those people, see the film have an effect. And then since we've heard that the Assistant Secretary for the Department of the Interior has tasked his staff to look into the matter of veteran benefits for the island. So in a way, the film could actually change policy, which is kind of an amazing thing that you create a documentary and it could change the world.
It's pretty remarkable. Did you ever have any idea or any intention that a film that you made could do that?
You know, you have to hope. It's so hard to do this stuff. It's so much work, and you kind of, you know, like especially with a feature, there's with short stuff, I feel like it's a little clearer to have like the arc and the film in your head ahead of time. But with a feature, there's so many moving parts. You kind of go into it and you kind of hope it all works out. But it's a lot of uncertainty. And so I think, yeah, I mean, it's great that it's having this effect and it's being positively received. And yeah, not sure that answered, but
being able to make a social change is a pretty powerful statement for whatever reason you go into film and making a documentary, but it is pretty powerful. So congratulations to that. So you have recently, you've been showing these screenings. You were in Providence not too long ago, recently had a showing in Seattle. What comes next for you and for the film?
we are headed to Prague next week for a screening at a Human Rights Watch film festival, and then we have screenings coming up in Atlanta, San Francisco, and LA in the next couple months. And we're trying to sort out, our funding has come through Pacific Islanders and Communication, which supports films for public broadcast. So we're trying to figure out the TV strand that we can work with to get the film out into the world and reach an audience through a TV broadcast. So that's something we're really excited about and working hard at.
Okay, so you'll let us know then when we can see it not at one of these festivals.
Absolutely.
Great.
But I would just add that the screening in Providence was especially gratifying because the project the root of the project happened when I was living there, and having gone, seen movies at the cable car, it was great to kind of be able to come back, screen it, and have local friends from Providence there.
And we do want to talk a little bit about this because, having lived here, there's always a Rhode Island connection. So let's talk a little bit. You mentioned that you kind of developed or started working production on Island Soldier when you lived here. Talk to us a little bit about that. And then, of course, always a Rhode Island connection. It's my understanding the film's one of the producers and editor, Brian Cheng, he's a graduate of Brown University, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, I mean the origin of the film came while I was living in Providence, and I just got back from the Peace Corps and was kind of trying to figure things out. And my brother was at Brown, and I came through for a weekend and met a bunch of nice people, and they invited me to move in. So it was a very spontaneous circumstances that led me to living in Providence. But I was working with a photographer named David Wells who lives on the East Side, and a photojournalist, multimedia storyteller. And I was telling him about this idea, and he was very encouraging. So I did a photo essay in Fort Carson, I believe in 2009, with him about the story, kind of an initial photo story, and then published that with a small magazine. But then had the realization that to really tell the story, 10 images isn't enough, that it really needs to incorporate the voices of the people and what that journey is like from these remote islands. So I kind of had that light bulb moment while living in Providence. And years later, I had moved to Brooklyn, and I'm part of a group called the Brooklyn Filmmakers Collective there, which is a workshop group that meets on a weekly basis to watch works in progress, scenes, brainstorm ideas for people, writing scripts, different ideas. And I had screened some samples from Island Soldier a couple times and connected with Brian Cheng, who was also a member of the Brooklyn Filmmakers Collective. And we had Providence friends in common and got to be friendly, and then was able to raise some money, and he came on as an editor and then came on as a producer. So it's been great to collaborate with him.
Always a Rhode Island connection. I'm glad it's a good Rhode Island connection. Definitely happy about that. Well, congratulations to you, Nathan. We really appreciate you chatting with us today. Hopefully we can keep in touch, and I'm glad that there's always good memories in Providence. Please let us know again what you're working on, anything in the works for what's coming up next. I know there's a lot on your plate for this movie, Island Soldier.
I just got done pitching a new documentary I'm doing about a 91-year-old New Yorker cartoonist.
Cool.
So it's going to be half animated, but it's going to be lighter. I think it's going to be although the cartoonist got his start when he was in the Marines during World War II, so there is still that military connection. But yeah, in production on that and a couple other things. So
cool.
And yeah.
Cool. Nathan, thank you so much for chatting with us here today. I appreciate it, and keep in touch. Let us know how you're doing.
Thank you for your time, Molly. I appreciate it.
Appreciate it. All right, everyone, we're going to get set up here for our next guest on Go Local Live. We'll have more information, including links to Nathan's profile and how you can see Island Soldier. Please hang tight as we get set up for our next guest here on Go Local Live. Everyone, thanks for joining us here in the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'm Molly O'Brien. I'd like to say hello and welcome to our next guest, Dr. Laura Williams. She is a microbiologist and assistant professor of biology at Providence College. Hello, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Thank you so much for joining us. This is pretty cool what we're going to talk about today. But first, let me just introduce some of your past work. Includes time working at the CDC and working in research with the U.S. Department of Agriculture. But today we're going to talk about what's known as predatory bacteria. So you and students at Providence College have been working on predatory bacteria, found some here on Rhode Island, and doing research on that and how it can really be used for good. So let's explore this a little bit, and then hopefully we'll have some time to talk about your work encouraging and motivating women in STEM fields. So hopefully we can get to that. So let's start off first by talking about what predatory bacteria is.
Sure. So predatory bacteria, these are bacteria that attack and digest other bacteria as a way of making a living. So every time I tell people this, because of my family, friends, random people that you meet that ask what you do, I say predatory bacteria and they immediately go, oh, am I in danger? Should we be worried? No.
Everyone get out your mask.
That's right. So if you're at home and you're like, oh my gosh, run for the hills. No, it's okay. Predatory bacteria don't actually attack human cells, but they will attack other bacteria. And that's not, even as a microbiologist, when I first learned about them, I thought that was surprising. Because you're used to thinking of predators as kind of charismatic big animals like lions and wolves and so forth. But these are in fact very small living organisms that make their living by attacking and hunting, essentially, other bacteria. And they're in Rhode Island.
And we have some in Rhode Island.
Yes.
So talk to me about how you went about finding these and getting interested in studying these.
Sure. So one of the main reasons that we're interested in studying these is kind of a downstream application.
Okay.
One of the things we know about current healthcare is that antibiotic resistance is a really big problem. So we know that the statistics from the Centers for Disease Control, they recently ran some numbers, and it's over 2 million illnesses a year, and potentially 23,000 deaths a year are due to antibiotic-resistant illnesses. So these are bacterial pathogens where there's no longer any effective antibiotics. And that's not something we're used to thinking about. We, once the first antibiotic was discovered in like the 1950s, we just thought, that's it, we've solved the problem of infectious disease. And now we're having problems with microbes that are resistant to these drugs. So for us, we're interested in helping out with research to look at whether or not predatory bacteria, because they can attack other bacteria, could be used as a living alternative to antibiotics. Which might sound far-fetched and crazy, but there have been a number of studies done that are showing that this actually has a lot of promise, and it's a viable solution to the antibiotic resistance problem. So that's kind of the long view of why we're interested in it.
It's a very shortened version of the very long
Right.
view, right? Because I'm sure it gets much more complicated than that. So
Right.
thanks for breaking it down, less complex version. I think this is absolutely fascinating. So let's talk a little bit about what you and some of your students have done. When she walked in here, I have to say, she gave credit to her students for doing the brunt of the work.
Absolutely.
Recently published a paper about these predatory bacteria being found in Rhode Island. Talk to me a little bit about the process of being able to find these and what you did find.
Sure, of course. When I actually haven't been here for very long, so I got here in January of 2015, and when I arrived, one of the first things we wanted to do was, can we get our hands on some predatory bacteria from Rhode Island? So I had 4 students who started out in the lab with me, undergraduate students. These are all college students at Providence College. And I said, just go out and see if you can find some, which in retrospect was maybe kind of a bit ambitious. At the time, we didn't really know, so I'm like, just go out, it'll be fine.
Good for them.
And they did great, and they found predatory bacteria in a number of different locations. So we're currently working with a lot of different types of predatory bacteria that students have isolated and students are working with. And the paper that we just had published was a predatory bacteria that were found in Mount Hope Bay, so just near Bristol. And I had a student, his name is Brett Enos. He's a class of 2016 graduate. And he would just drive down to the coast, walk out into the water, take a sample, bring it back, and that's how he got his hands on. It was a little more complicated than that. So if Brett sees this, he'll probably be like, look, it was harder than that. But essentially, he was able to, and the other students were able to sample sites around Rhode Island and bring these samples into the lab. And we were able to work with the predatory bacteria that can be found just in environments around the state.
It's absolutely fascinating. So when you're looking at these, doing the research, finding them, how exactly does it work? Because we're looking at this and hoping for what's to come next. So what exactly do they attack? What exactly do they eat? And how can that be beneficial?
That's a great question. And that's actually one of the major things that the students do in the lab. So once they get their hands on predatory bacteria and we can keep them in the lab and grow them in the lab, we start asking questions about precisely what you just asked. That's the next great question is, what can they do? So in terms of what can they attack? What other types of bacteria? And in our minds, we're particularly interested in, do we think they could potentially attack pathogens? So bacteria that cause disease. That's what we're really interested in. Can we find some predatory bacteria that are good at attacking bacteria that cause illness or cause disease? And so the students will actually, in the lab, they don't work with pathogenic strains because biosafety is very important. But they work with a lot of different types of strains, and they can get a sense of, does this type of predatory bacteria attack a lot of things, or is it very specific for certain things? And what might that tell us about future applications? So, and they're excellent at this. They do all kinds of great work in the lab to kind of understand these questions.
Well, it has to be kind of fun to be thinking, even though you're working it has to be at such a, I don't know if cellular is the right word to be using, but such a cellular level, but to be thinking that it could impact so many eventually down the road, right? It has to be very exciting.
Yeah, I really love it, and I think the students are really motivated by it because they're answering questions right now, But the long-term goal, every question that we answer is a step closer to that, which is, for people who aren't familiar with science, that's the exciting but also frustrating thing about science is you make progress, but it's incremental progress. And over the long term, you can look back and kind of see how every question you answered was a brick to kind of try to get towards where you want to go.
So if we're looking at this, something that came to mind when I'm trying to kind of put this together, puzzle things together, we're looking at bacteria, and something that you wrote about on the website and listening to past interviews and things that you've done is that bacteria can be found just about anywhere, and that bacteria can be very good. In this example, looking down the road, we're looking at bacteria hopefully being very beneficial. Something that came to my mind was like a fecal transplant, right?
Yes.
So using bacteria from someone else that you think, okay, it's kind of interesting, but bacteria being transplanted in one form to help. I mean, is that kind of what we're looking at? Just different forms of using bacteria eventually to help? I mean, different, but...
Absolutely, and you bring up a great point. So with this idea of fecal transplants, which I've taught this in my classes, and it's a great way to make sure everyone's awake.
Yeah.
Because all you have to do is say fecal transplants,
like,
and
what?
anyone who drifted away is like, we do what now? What?
Yeah,
What?
exactly. But fascinating.
But absolutely, and it works, is the thing. So for the particular condition that it's been most well studied for, a fecal transplant works. It's the best treatment we really have out there.
Yeah.
And this is the same idea where you're thinking of, and it's a shift in our thinking too. Up to this point, recently, we've been thinking of healthcare in terms of kind of on the chemical side of things.
Yeah.
Which, you know, that word is sometimes loaded now, but in a lot of cases, antibiotics are going to save your life. But what we're thinking about is, can we start to bring some ecology back into it, where we're thinking about living organisms and using those as a way to kind of partner with the antibiotics we have so that they can continue to be effective. So you're absolutely right. This would be a case where if we develop this, if this actually becomes a therapy or a treatment, people would be ingesting living bacteria that would then go on in their bodies to attack the bacteria that you don't want there. And that's kind of the ultimate goal.
Amazing.
Long way down the road.
Long way down the road.
We're closer than we might have thought a couple of years ago, which is exciting.
Right, scooping something up out of Mount Hope Bay.
Exactly.
So again, early stages, but where do we go from here? Where do you go from here, I should say? Yeah, so for our lab, this paper that just came out, so it just came out earlier this year, that's the first paper of a whole set of data that we have. So we've had a number of students. I have 8 students working in the lab right now. A couple of them, I'll just list some names so they get to kind of hear themselves. So Molly Oser, Carla Martinez, Angie Casale, Luke Zappia, Joe Mangiamele, so I can go through the whole list of people. Yeah, no, it's fine with me.
But they're all in the lab right now, and they are getting really close to having their own papers ready to publish.
Congratulations.
And those studies are looking at kind of a broader question of trying to understand if we're thinking about predatory bacteria in the environment and developing them into therapies, what we'd like to know is what's available out there that could be used as a tool. So right now we're kind of describing what you might call diversity or variation in predatory bacteria. So for all the predatory bacteria that we're picking out of different sites in the environment, maybe one is especially good at attacking pathogens. And so we might continue on with that one. And so we're kind of laying the groundwork to be able to move forward to the next step.
Okay. So, do you know, are there other, I'm sure you're in touch because of your background and your research in other places, are there people doing this across the nation?
Yeah, it's funny because there's not as many people in this research field as I would have expected because I think it's fascinating, so I'm a little biased. But yeah, there are a couple of other groups in the United States, but then there's also groups overseas, international groups. Some of those groups are a lot farther along with the proof of concept type experiments that would say, could you use this in people? No one's done any tests, to my knowledge. No one's done any tests in humans yet, but we've done tests in other ways that suggest, yeah, this could really work, and it makes sense to kind of continue it. And it's a small community, but a really helpful community too. So we've been in touch with a lot of those researchers. In some case, they've sent us some materials, and they've sent us a lot of advice, which we really welcome as well.
I bet that's also super helpful for students moving forward because they can connect if they're interested in any of these fields. They can connect, communicate, talk, and that has to be really helpful for 5 years, 10 years down the road, advancing science, advancing medicine overall, right?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's one of the exciting things for me being at at Providence College and certainly working with undergraduate students is it's difficult because they leave you after, they're doing all this great work and then they graduate and you're like, no,
don't graduate, you were good at
this.
this.
You're so good. But it's also really exciting because you get to see they're going to go off and they're going to do amazing things. And they're going to follow different paths, and some of them might continue on with scientific research. Some of them may not, but in all cases you kind of get to see this is their launching pad, and so you kind of get to see where they go. And some of the folks in my lab have expressed some interest in going on into graduate school and continuing with science. And so it would be really exciting to see if they decide to do that, where they end up.
Was the young man that published the paper, was he undergrad?
Yes, yeah. All undergraduates, yeah.
That's incredible.
I know, yeah, they're amazing. They really are.
That's incredible.
He did. I'll tell a quick story about him, which might embarrass him if he ever watches this. So he went to a scientific conference, and you stand in front of a poster, and people come by and you tell them about their work. And later on he told me, he was like, somebody said that I didn't have enough authors on here because they didn't believe that I did all of this. And I said, well, that's probably because they found out you're an undergraduate student, but that gives you a sense of how great they are and how much work they've done. And that's true for all of them. Every single person in the lab.
Wow.
Who I did not list everyone, but they're all really doing amazing work, and it's exciting to kind of see them get excited about it too.
That's truly remarkable. So we look forward to hearing about what comes next.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, geez, you'll have to come back.
Yeah.
Before we do let you go, Laura, I do want to talk to you a little bit about, because this isn't the only field that you are interested in. You're also working to encourage more women in the field of science, technology, and math, engineering, math. I also like to throw in art there sometimes because we like to talk about STEAM. Yep, exactly. Yep. I always like to highlight women in science, and so talk to me a little bit about why that's important for you.
Yeah, I really think that, so at Providence College we're working on getting a Women in STEM initiative started for our undergraduate students. That's certainly not new. There's a lot of institutions, both educational and even in the corporate world, that have women in STEM groups and women in STEM initiatives. And I think one of the key things with this is just the idea that we're looking to try to make sure that opportunities in science and technology, engineering and math are really available to everybody who has an interest, everybody who sees that as their passion. They have a path available to them in which they're supported and encouraged, and we make sure that we kind of nurture folks that are headed down that path. There's some specific things we can address for women in Women in STEM initiatives. At PC, we're also, on the side of that, we're also thinking about making sure both our men and women students kind of have all these opportunities available to them. But sometimes we find that there's some unique situations faced by women, and it's best to kind of have a group that they can think about that, talk to other people, learn a little more about what's available to them and how to handle certain things if they run across them in their careers.
And I think it's always interesting and encouraging when you speak to women, letting people know, like I've talked to women scientists before when they go out and they talk to people, they're talking to younger students, and you ask, what do you think a scientist looks like?
Yeah, yep.
And I always find that so interesting. They never say just anybody, right? It's always a very specific picture. So I think
lots of white lab coats and lots of like white crazy Einstein hair.
Yeah, exactly. So I do think it's important to highlight that a scientist can look like whoever you want it to be. Absolutely. A scientist can look like you and me.
Absolutely, yes. And that's the thing that I think to kind of continue to talk about my students, but I mean, they're scientists, you know, and I think it's also helping to convince these students that they're scientists as well. Yeah. Because when you're in college at this level, you kind of used to thinking about yourself as a student, and this is a great time to transition into thinking about, no, I'm a professional in this field. I'm doing this work, doing this research. I am a scientist. And I think that's an important thing too.
providing access, breaking barriers to anybody that wants to be in the field.
Absolutely.
Of STEM fields, STEAM fields. I think that's super important. So
Yeah.
please continue to provide those access points, continue mentorship. I think that's incredible.
Yes, we will happily do that.
Awesome. And come back. Come back
Yeah.
and talk to me about this more. Come back and talk about your research, talk about your students, talk about predatory bacteria. Fascinating. I love it. I think it's so cool. Hopefully I understood it just enough to think
Yes,
it's that
no,
cool.
You had great questions. I really
Okay,
appreciate it.
great.
Yeah, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to come talk about this. 'Cause
Awesome.
we're very excited about it.
Awesome. Congratulations to all the Providence College students that are doing great work there as well. Dr. Laura Williams, thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to take a quick pause and get set up here for our next guest on Go Local Live.
My fault.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining me back here in the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'm Molly O'Brien. I'm joined by Frank Santos Jr. He is a hypnotist and does it in many forms. So Frank, thanks so much for joining me here today. How are you?
Great, how are you?
I'm doing well. So let's talk a little bit about how you got into being a comic hypnotist, and then we'll get into the other kind of stuff that you do.
Sure, my dad did shows when I was probably 4 years old. So I grew up with it, and then when I was about 20, I started doing shows then.
That's pretty fun. So
Yeah.
talk to us just a little bit about how you got into it, how your dad got into it, and really how you even go about becoming a hypnotist.
Sure. So my dad actually owned his own market for years, and then he saw a hypnotist at a show, and he got interested in it, so he decided to look into it. So he looked into it, got certified. He was doing clinical, quit smoking, weight loss, stuff like that. But at a party he was at, the intimate didn't show up. They asked him to try it out, so he did, and it went really well. So from there, it just built up to more and more shows. He's like a legend for a long time. And then I started doing shows after that.
So it's kind of a family tradition.
Correct, yes.
Family tradition. You got to keep
Definitely.
it going.
Yes.
So you have a show tonight at the Comedy Connection,
Yes,
right?
yes.
So what do you do when you're going out there? You're performing in front of people. Do you really just feed off the audience? Is it really just kind of a comedy? You really have to feed off the audience, but also really kind of just depends on what people are doing. How does it all work?
So the audience to me is like batteries. They give me energy to do a show, but I need the volunteers. If people volunteer, I have a good show, and that makes it fun. So it's up to the audience to be fun, and the people in the audience to volunteer. No volunteers is a terrible show. A lot of volunteers is a good show.
Do you normally see, are usually people pretty excited and they're pretty forthcoming when it comes to this kind of stuff?
When you go to my show, you're expecting to volunteer, you expect to have audience participation, so that's what I'm hoping for. So yes, definitely.
So what do people expect? So people are coming for the comedic performances. We'll get into the therapeutic hypnosis later. What can people expect? Like if they're coming to just watch a show, they don't want to go up there and volunteer. What is a little bit of it like?
So the deal is I get the volunteers, I do a little test, and then I get them all hypnotized. And from there I do skits. So the skits are funny. I turn people to singers, dancers, make them believe they have to go to the bathroom, they get halfway there, they forget. So it's a fun show, interactive with the audience, and you can actually be a star of the show if you do volunteer.
Okay. I think a lot of times people think it's pretty funny, but they get nervous to volunteer because they don't want to embarrass themselves,
Correct.
right? So talk to us a little bit about hypnosis. You know, people might have common misconceptions. Maybe we can do like a fact and false about that.
So a lot of people think that when you're getting hypnotized, you lose all control and I'm controlling you, and that's a myth. That's not true. You actually hypnotize yourself on stage. I get you there. I'm like the directions. So if you're building a desk and it comes in a box and you see the directions, read directions, and you build everything, the directions didn't build a desk, you built it. So I'm like the directions getting you there, and I hypnotize you, but you actually hypnotize yourself. But once on hypnosis, you won't do anything you normally wouldn't do, anything against your will, your morals, anything that bothers you. I can't force you, I can't ask you questions about the past. I'm not going to answer them if it's going to hurt you or your spouse or somebody else. So it's just relaxation.
Okay, so I wouldn't, you know, if you told me to punch you right now,
Right.
I'm not going to do that. So even if you told me to punch you, I wouldn't.
Correct,
do it.
unless you
Okay.
wanted to punch me. Yes.
I don't want to punch you.
No, thank you.
So
Appreciate that.
no violence,
Yes,
please.
exactly.
No violence, please. So yeah, I think it's fun, and you've done a lot of performances. You've performed a lot of places. You've had a lot of big clients, like performing at Google, at Nike, CVS, these big companies. Do people usually react the same way? Do people really seem to enjoy it?
Yes.
And then get relaxed because of it?
Correct, yes. So a lot of shows are different. I do a lot of theater shows, and it seems like a theater crowd is there to see your show, and they're really into it. I do a lot of comedy clubs, they're there to see your show. So, but when you do a corporate style show, sometimes they're forced there. It's a little tougher.
They're like, oh, I have so much work to do. So many emails.
Yeah, exactly. So that gets a little tough, but I mean, usually 95% of the time it's fun. Everyone has a good time. I have a good time, and I really enjoy doing it. As long as you're laughing, I'm having a good time.
What's been some of your favorite things to do, or favorite places to perform, or, you know, because you do things with school audiences, and what's usually the best kind of crowd, or what's maybe your favorite gag skit?
Well, colleges are usually the easiest in high schools because all the kids want to volunteer, the students want to volunteer. They don't have too many like skeletons in the closet, you would say. Even though I don't ask you anything about your past or what's going on with you now, people think that when you're more of an adult.
Yeah.
So they think they're going to lose something, which it doesn't happen. But fun skits, I like to turn people to singers because sometimes you have a person who sings amazing and the crowd is amazed by it. Then you have somebody who thinks they're amazing and they're awful. It's even funnier. So that's a good part. In terms of dancers, ballet, depends on the style show. High school shows are PG, G-rated shows. But tonight, the Comedy Connection is an R-rated show.
Okay.
So I turn people to sit at ballerinas. They're like exotic dancers. But no one gets naked. It's not like that. It's just
Maybe it's a little twerky or
yeah,
something
exactly.
like that. Okay.
Exactly, yes. Exactly.
Let's talk a little bit about the other side of things. So we like to laugh, which is always a bit of therapy in itself.
Correct.
But you also are clinically certified in hypnosis. How did you get into doing that?
So when you get certified, which I did in the 90s, they don't teach stage hypnosis. They teach therapeutic, like quit smoking, weight loss, doing phobias. So I got certified in that aspect of hypnosis. I also got certified so I can teach it if I really wanted to. I don't, but I could. So I do a lot of quit smoking and weight loss. That's pretty much what I keep to because mainly I do shows. If I'm around during the weekday, I have an office. People can come see me too. If you want to eat healthier, I help you out. I don't put you on a diet. I say healthy eating, healthy lifestyle. And quit smoking, that's the big thing I love to help people with because that's such a bad habit to break. And it's a hard habit to break. But with hypnosis, if you really want to quit, it really does help you.
So how do you actually do hypnosis? And what do you say to people that are like, nah, that's nothing.
So
You're a fraud or whatever.
Right,
Like,
right.
how do you deal with people saying that kind of stuff?
I'm used to it.
Yeah.
I mean, I've
It's been years and years and years.
I've been doing shows now since '94. So
Yeah.
for 20 some odd years,
Yeah.
I always have people saying it's all fake, it's all fake. And I always try to tell them, come back with a group of people, try to have a friend volunteer. And when they go on stage, the show is funnier for you. But then you see the person you know on stage and it's just that bad. Like, wow, they're really under hypnosis. So
Yeah.
it's true. I mean, I help so many people quit smoking, eat healthier. But on stage, people come to me all the time, that was the funniest thing, this person would never ever do that, and they had a great time. So, but just relaxation, I can't make you do anything you don't want to do.
So maybe if people want to, like, quitting smoking, I think could definitely be beneficial.
Correct.
What about, so hypnosis can be very, like, a relaxation technique. What if people just want help relaxing?
So, yeah, so people do are anxious, have high anxiety or high blood pressure, the relaxation really helps you calm down. So I can actually teach you to relax yourself. So when you're hyped up or you feel intense, you feel stressed, a lot of people either reach for a cigarette or reach for food or do something bad. I can actually train you just to relax yourself, calm yourself down. And once you start feeling that relaxation feeling, you look forward to doing it all the time.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So say people come to a show and they want to get hypnotized and maybe have some barriers, or they want to come to you and get hypnotized to help in whatever type of healthy lifestyle maneuver. How do you make yourself more able to get hypnotized?
All right, so the best way to get hypnotized is, for one, to be willing. I can't force you to. So if you're willing, you should be able to go under. For clinical, it's a guarantee pretty much you can go under, unless you just fight the whole time. With stage, a little different because there's people new when it's coughing or sneezing or clanging the glass or the talking.
There's always someone coughing or sneezing.
Right, exactly. So it's a little harder. So the best subject would be, if you really want to be hypnotized, is somebody who can focus well and concentrate on my voice and the music, be able to block out things, but also be willing. Willing is a huge thing. But if you have a good imagination, you'd be great on stage as well.
Okay. So if you're interested, he has a show tonight at the Comedy Connection. And you're a Rhode Island guy, right?
Yes, yeah, I'm a local Cumberland guy.
Cumberland guy. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So should be a lot of fun. Could you ever see yourself doing anything else?
I was a cook for years. I still do that at home, but I enjoy doing the hypnosis. I love helping people. I really love making people laugh. Seeing someone laugh, I think it's great, and if they're enjoying themselves, I'll keep doing it.
It's kind of a therapy in itself.
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Frank Santos Jr., thank you so much for joining us here today. It's been a true pleasure. I'm not going to get hypnotized, so anyone who was hoping for that, sorry, not happening.
Next time.
We're wrapping up here in the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'm Molly O'Brien. Thanks so much for joining us. Ava Gaudette kicks off things at 3 o'clock tomorrow, followed by Kate Nagel for news and politics. Thanks so much for joining us. Have a great one.